They came without warning. The sky above the colony burned red as alien ships dropped from the clouds like thunder. The ground shook with the force of impact, and the air was filled with the screams of civilians running for cover. The colony on Delta IV was not built for war. It was a peaceful outpost full of scientists, engineers, and families. Their only defense was a small group of military personnel led by Commander Riker Hayes, a man who had seen too many battles and survived them all. Riker stood at the edge of the colony wall, holding his pulse rifle tightly. His eyes scanned the horizon as alien machines marched forward, tall armored beasts, firing plasma blasts into buildings. The defense turrets were destroyed in the first 5 minutes. The comms were dead, and the few soldiers left were either wounded or dead. Riker knew there was no backup coming. This was not a battle, it was a slaughter. He moved through the smoke and rubble, helping civilians find shelter, pushing a wounded boy behind a broken wall and handing a small child to a fleeing mother. He fought like a demon, taking down enemy drones with precise shots, always moving, never stopping. His body was bruised and burned, but his mind stayed clear. The aliens were called the Dravari, a cold, logical species with a vast empire built on domination and fear. They believed in control through technology and mind suppression. They had studied many races and found most to be weak. Their goal was to capture a human alive for study. They had never faced humanity directly, only heard whispers across the stars of their strange resistance and chaotic thinking. They believed those were just myths. When they saw Riker fighting alone, holding off an entire platoon, they decided he was the perfect specimen, a commander, a warrior, a leader. He was surrounded by 300 drones, each one large and fast with spiked limbs and bladed tails. He took down 2 before the third slammed him into a wall, knocking the air from his lungs. He woke up inside a cold metal chamber, his arms chained above his head, the lights above blinding white. His weapons were gone, his armor stripped, only his dog tags remained hanging from his neck. The room smelled of chemicals and oil. A single Dravari entered the room, tall and insect-like its skin, a hard shell of violet gray, its eyes glowing blue. The alien leaned close, studying his face with interest. It spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber, slow and mechanical. "You are different." It said, "You do not fear death." Riker stared back, his face bruised but his eyes sharp. "Maybe you just don't know how to inspire fear." The Dravari tilted its head, then turned and left, the door sealed behind it. In the hours that followed, they ran tests. They scanned his brain, measured his heart rate, tested his blood pressure, and exposed him to psychological simulations designed to break weaker minds. He stayed silent through most of it. When they showed him images meant to trigger fear or pain, he stared at the screen like it was a joke. They began to whisper about him in their own language, how he was too calm, how his mind resisted their influence. He was unpredictable, which made him dangerous. Some called for immediate termination, others wanted more tests inside his cell. Riker watched everything: the guards, the cameras, the machines. Even while they thought he was unconscious, he listened, counted footstep patterns, and watched the blinking lights on the control panels. He knew he couldn't fight his way out yet, but he could wait and plan. Back on Earth, humanity had always believed in adapting under pressure. They were born on a death world with wild oceans, deadly animals, and unforgiving climates. They had evolved to survive in chaos. Riker was no exception. He had survived the Martian rebellion, the siege of Europa, and the Black Star crisis. He had been captured once before and escaped from worse than this. Dravari believed they had captured a sample of humanity. They were wrong. They had captured a storm that hadn't started yet. That night, as the ship drifted through deep space, the lights in the lab flickered for a moment. The guards didn't notice. A small ventilation panel near Riker's cell vibrated just slightly. Before going still again, Riker looked up slowly, a tiny smirk forming on his face. He wasn't just going to escape. He was going to send a message to the galaxy. A message written in fire and fear, and the first lesson was about to begin. Riker woke to the sound of soft mechanical hums around him. The walls of the alien cell glowed with a strange blue light, and the air was cold with a metallic bite. He stretched his arms as far as the chains allowed, feeling the tight grip of alien steel around his wrists. He had not eaten in 2 days, but his mind was still sharp and focused. The Dravari scientists returned, this time in a group. They carried strange tools and devices that buzzed and clicked as they surrounded him. One of them placed a thin metal band around his head while another pressed a long needle into his arm. They spoke in their language, fast and full of numbers, as if he was a broken machine to be studied and repaired. But Riker did not scream. He did not beg or cry. He watched them with steady eyes, memorizing every face, every sound, every tool. His silence unnerved them, and that was the first crack in their armor. Lead scientist, a tall figure with glowing yellow eyes, stepped forward and tapped on a small screen. Machine beside him displayed Riker's heartbeat and brain activity. The numbers confused them. The human's brain showed signs of resistance patterns they had never seen before. His mind was not only active, but pushing back against their influence. He is rejecting the neural mapping, said one of them. Impossible, said another. No species has resisted the probe before. They increased the signal strength, fed energy into the neural web. Riker's eyes only narrowed and his jaw clenched harder. Every time they tried to enter his mind, it felt like walking into a storm. They brought in fear simulators, next projecting images of fire, drowning, and death into his mind, designed to trigger panic and helplessness. They made the chamber fill with smoke. They played recordings of screams and even mimicked the voices of his dead comrades. But Riker remained still. His heart barely changed rhythm, and his breathing stayed calm. After hours of failed tests, the Dravari began to argue. The subject is broken, said one. Throw it out and start again. No, said the lead scientist. This one is important. He is hiding something. Humans should not be this strong. The guards dragged him back to his cell, locking the door behind them. As soon as they left, Riker opened his hand and revealed a small metal pin. He had stolen it from one of their machines during the testing. Quiet and unnoticed, he stared at it for a moment, then hid it under the floor panel near the edge of his bed. They thought he was passive, but he was building a plan, one piece at a time. In the next test chamber, they strapped him to a floating platform and raised him into a gravity well, meant to stretch the body and stress the bones. The force pressed down on him like a mountain. He could feel his joints scream and his muscles shake, but he gritted his teeth and endured. We will find your limits, the scientist said calmly. You first, Riker muttered under his breath. Meanwhile, something strange began happening in the lab. Systems started failing, lights flickered, equipment rebooted on its own, doors opened and closed without command. At first they thought it was just technical error, but soon it became more serious. One guard disappeared during patrol. Another was found unconscious in the control room with no memory of what happened. Panic started to spread in whispers among the crew. Some believed the human had infected the ship with a virus. Others thought he had brought a curse, but it was none of those things. Riker had simply observed their systems long enough to understand the basics. He had figured out patterns in their power cycles, learned to interfere with simple tools, and even started triggering feedback loops in their scanners by tapping his foot in a specific rhythm against the metal floor. They called him Subject Zero, the first of his kind to be tested, the last they would ever take. Each day, they grew more afraid of him. Each time they entered his cell, they came in larger groups with heavier weapons, but still their hands trembled. Their eyes darted around the room as if expecting shadows to move. Riker saw it in their faces. They were starting to doubt themselves. That was the true beginning of their downfall. One of the younger scientists, a curious one with softer eyes, dared to ask him a question during a scan. Why are you not afraid of us? Because you don't understand what fear really is. Riker replied calmly, you think it comes from pain or death, but it comes from knowing you made a mistake, and it's already too late to fix it. Words stayed in the scientist's mind long after he left the chamber. That night, something shorted in the control panel outside Riker's cell. The lights went dark for 3 full seconds, and when they came back on, a small camera was broken, and the ventilation grid above had a fresh scratch in its corner. They had captured a human. They had tested his limits. But what they did not know was that humans had no fixed limits, only thresholds, and once crossed, they became something unstoppable. Riker was not planning to survive anymore. He was planning to win. Riker sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the cold steel floor of his cell. The lights above flickered, now more often than before. A low hum filled the air as the ship moved through space, but something had changed in the rhythm of the sound. He could feel it like a soldier hears the silence before the gunfire. The guards had started to avoid him. They walked faster near his cell and kept their helmets on even when the ship's air was safe. Their posture had shifted to less pride, more caution. They thought he could not see it, but he saw everything. Each morning, the Dravari brought him into the test chamber, but now the tests were shorter, their questions sharper. They no longer tried to break him, instead they tried to understand him, why he would not break, why his mind resisted, why the systems around him kept failing when he was near. They never found answers, and that made them afraid. Inside his cell, he had mapped out the room inch by inch using his eyes and memory. He knew where every vent, pipe, and wire ran. He had taken pieces of metal from the floor, great small broken shards that came loose when the ship trembled. He hid them in the soft layer beneath his bed frame, wrapped in cloth torn from his uniform. One night, during the sleep cycle, the lights in the hallway outside his cell dimmed for 3 full minutes. He counted every second during those minutes and watched as the backup lights flickered in the corner. That was his opening, a pattern he had noticed. For days he reached beneath the floor, pulled out a thin wire he had shaped like a key, and pushed it into the lock of his wrist chain. The first time it failed, the second time it sparked, the third time it clicked, and his right hand was free. He froze, waiting for alarms. None came. He unlocked the second shackle and dropped silently to the floor. His muscles ached, but he moved like a shadow, low and fast, to the vent at the edge of his cell wall. He removed the panel he had loosened days before and crawled inside. The tunnel was tight and hot. The air was stale, but he moved forward slowly, keeping his hands and knees light against the metal. He passed over rooms and corridors, listening to alien voices below. Some spoke of him, calling him a ghost. Others said he was cursed. One said he should have been killed the day he was caught. He smiled to himself as he moved deeper into the ship. At the core of the vessel was the data room, where all communication and system controls were linked. Riker had seen it once during transport to a scan room guarded by 2 sentries with pulse staffs. He had counted their steps, watched their shift changes, and marked the timing. It was risky, but necessary. He needed access to their systems, not to escape, but to learn more about the ship and maybe send a signal. He waited near the air vent above the data room, listening to the steps of the guards. 1 passed, 2 passed. Then silence. He dropped down like a shadow, knees bending to absorb the fall. He struck the first guard behind the knee, grabbed his weapon, and slammed it into the second before either could react. It was over in seconds. Dragged the bodies into the corner and pressed the panel on the console. A language filled the screen, but he had seen enough to understand the basics. He tapped through systems using memory and logic, finding access to engine controls, map grids, and finally the communication relay. The signal was weak, but he sent a coded burst, a repeating message in a human distress frequency. "This is Commander Riker Hayes, taken aboard Dravari science vessel, requesting extraction coordinates attached." He sent it 3 times before cutting the signal and wiping the record. He knew the Dravari would find the breach, but he also knew they would not find him again in the same place. As he slipped back into the vent system, he heard alarms begin to rise in the ship. The guards had discovered the empty cell and missing vent panel. The search had begun, but Riker was already 2 levels down, heading toward the storage bay. He needed weapons, food, and tools. With those, he could begin his next move, not just hiding or surviving, but striking back. In the storage bay, he found a plasma cutter, a pack of rations, and a shock baton. He tested each tool, checking the weight, the power, the charge levels. He was ready. The Dravari believed they were still in control, but they had already lost it. The ship was too large to scan every vent, too complex to shut down without crashing, and now it had a human ghost walking through its walls. Riker did not plan to run anymore. He was going to take their ship piece by piece from the inside. He was going to make them understand what it meant to turn a soldier into a prisoner. And he was going to make them regret ever learning the word human. The alarm lights turned the hallways red. The ship pulsed like a living thing, panicked and angry. Voices echoed across the comms in the Dravari language, orders flying from one deck to another. All security teams were ordered to find the human, but none could track him. He had vanished into the body of the ship. Riker moved like smoke through the vents, slipping past cameras and sensors. He knew the patrol paths now. He had time there. Rotations watched their habits and weaknesses. Every sound told him something: the way boots struck the floor, the pitch of the engine, the flicker in the lights. He was no longer a prisoner. He was the shadow in their walls. In the last 3 days, he had hit 4 key locations. A storage room lost its supply of energy packs. A weapons locker was found opened and empty. A guard station was sabotaged, the systems fried, and all cameras disabled. Then came the medbay, where he took healing kits and sedatives that could knock out a Dravari in seconds. They still did not understand how one man could do this alone. But the fear was growing. One of the guards had started marking symbols on the walls, old warning signs from their homeworld, used to keep spirits away, some believed. Riker was not human, but something worse, something they had awakened and could not put back. Riker knew the fear was working better than any weapon. He returned to the data room, now carrying a stolen plasma cutter and a shock grenade. He planted the grenade inside the panel, rewired the control system, and set it on a timed loop. When the next crew member logged in, the panel would explode, wiping out all ship access for several hours. His plan was not just to escape anymore. He wanted to break the ship's system step by step, bleed it from the inside like a slow infection until it fell down. In the engine room, a small explosion rocked. The lower level pipes burst and sparks rained down. A technician screamed as the fire suppression system locked down the hallway, trapping 3 engineers inside. Security rushed in only to find strange markings etched into the wall using the soot from the fire. A human skull with 2 words in their own language beneath. "IDAM here." The Dravari council aboard the ship gathered in the command deck, faces tense. One of the high commanders slammed his fist against the table, shouting in anger. Why was this not prevented? Why is one human able to destroy a ship of thousands? "Is not acting like a normal prisoner," another replied. "He is thinking like a hunter." They increased patrols, doubled the guard rotations, and armed every crew member with a shock rifle. But it only made things worse now. Every shadow looked dangerous. Every sound made them jump. In the waste disposal chamber, 2 guards were knocked out cold, their weapons gone, and their armor missing. In the hallway outside, someone had written another message with glowing plasma ink: "Wrong species to capture." Riker was not just winning, he was making them feel it. On the 4th day, he found the power core controls hidden deep beneath the main decks, locked behind layers of security and guarded by elite units. He watched them for hours, then struck at the perfect moment, using gas from the medbay and a broken fire system to flood the chamber in seconds. The guards went down without a fight, and Riker walked in calm and silent. He did not destroy the power core. Instead, he rewired the heat venting system so the ship would slowly overheat every time it tried to jump through hyperspace. It would not break immediately, but the damage would grow with each jump. He left a note hanging from one of the consoles, written in scratched metal: "This ship is mine by." Now the Dravari had given him a name in their own tongue. It meant the ghost with the burning eyes. He had become a myth, a warning passed from soldier to soldier. One of the younger soldiers started begging to be transferred off the ship. Another tried to desert through an escape pod but found the system locked. Someone was cutting the wires to every escape route from the inside. The ship's leaders began to argue, some calling for full lockdown, others for emergency landing, but no one wanted to admit the truth. They had lost control. Inside a dark supply room, Riker sat with a stolen map of the ship laid out before him. Marked in red were the systems he had hit. Marked in yellow were his next targets, and in green was the communication room. where he would send one final signal back to Earth. He looked at the glowing paths before him, then slowly stood and picked up his shock baton. His face was calm, eyes sharp, posture steady. It was time to turn fear into fire. The uprising had begun, and the hunter was no longer hiding. He was walking straight into the heart of the enemy's nest with one mission left: burn the Dravari from the inside. And make the stars remember what happens when you chain a human and call him weak. The walls of the Dravari ship were silent now. No more footsteps, no more voices. The crew had stopped moving in groups. They had started locking themselves inside rooms, trusting doors more than weapons. Shadows were no longer just shadows, not when a single human had turned a mighty vessel into a trap. Riker moved through the hallways with steady steps. He wore armor taken from a guard chestplate, cracked at the side helmet, modified with a visor so he could see heat signatures. His shock baton was tied to his belt beside a pulse pistol stolen from the command deck. He reached the outer corridor that led to the main communication hub. The doors were guarded by 2 sentries who stood without blinking. Their armor was heavier and their weapons larger than the others. Riker studied them from a corner camera panel, his fingers resting on the grenade at his side. He had one chance. He threw the grenade, and it rolled across the floor, stopping between the guards. They turned too slow. The flash blinded them, and in the second of silence Riker charged forward. He struck the first across the helmet, the visor cracking as sparks burst from the side. The second fired, but missed, and Riker tackled him into the wall, slamming the butt of his pistol into the back of the creature's neck. Both fell hard. The hallway went quiet again. Riker dragged their bodies aside, then entered the comms room. The walls were filled with panels blinking in alien colors. It looked more like a control center for a starport than a ship. Every system was labeled in the Dravari language, but Riker had already learned the symbols he needed. He moved to the central console and pressed a sequence of buttons. Screens shifted, languages changed, and finally he found the manual override. It was time to speak to Earth. He linked the signal to an old human emergency code, one used only during war times. A deep voice answered after several seconds, the transmission full of static. "This is Earth Command. Identify yourself." "This is Commander Riker Hayes aboard Dravari vessel designation unknown. I am alive and in control of partial systems." The voice paused. Then came the question, "Are you safe, Commander?" "Not yet," Riker answered. "I am inside their ship. They tried to break me. Tried to test human limits. I turned their lab into a battlefield." "Are you requesting extraction?" "Negative. I am requesting backup. Bring everything you have. These creatures are planning more than tests. This was just a scout ship. They are preparing for something bigger. Earth needs to know." "Understood, Commander. Transmitting coordinates. Help is on the way. Stay alive always." Riker said and cut the link. He turned from the console just as the emergency lights switched to blue. That meant only one thing. The command center had locked onto his location. They were coming not with scientists this time, but with elite security units, the real warriors of the Dravari. Riker did not run. He had planned for this. He moved fast through the halls, passing broken vents and burned out doors. Every corner of the ship told a story, now stories of sabotage, of resistance, of a human who would not kneel. He reached the gravity core chamber and opened the panel he had rigged days ago. The coolant system was ready to fail. One button was all it would take, and the ship would tilt just slightly enough to throw balance out across several floors. He pressed it, and a deep hum followed. The floor shifted, not enough to destroy, but enough to confuse and delay anyone trying to reach him. Then he moved upward toward the observation deck, a place where the stars could be seen through transparent metal windows, the perfect place for his next move. He waited there, watching the stars as alarms blared below him. Ships like this were never meant to be taken over, never meant to fear one man. But here he stood, one human against thousands, and still he held the upper hand. Through the window he saw distant flashes, small lights moving fast toward the ship. Earth had answered the call. Reinforcements were coming. But Riker was not finished yet. He opened the small case he had taken from the weapons room. Inside were 3 explosives carefully rigged. set to disable core systems across the ship. One for propulsion, one for power, and one for control. He planted the first bomb in the engine hallway, hiding it behind the coolant pipes. Then the second in the main power channel near the glowing fusion cables. The third he saved for last. He returned to the command deck where the Dravari leaders had once stood proud. Now only silence greeted him. The room was empty, but he placed the last explosive beneath the command chair. As he left, he looked at the walls once more and carved one final message using the tip of his broken knife. Never chain a human. The countdown had begun. Riker made his way to the lower docks where escape pods waited behind sealed doors. He used a stolen code to unlock one and climbed inside as the timer reached its final phase. The pod launched just as the first explosion hit. The ship shook behind him, lights bursting, fire tearing through its metal body. One blast, then two, then three, and then silence again as the Dravari vessel began to drift. Powerless across the stars, Riker watched from the pod, breathing slow and steady. Earth would come soon, and when they did, they would know what happened here. Would know one thing above all: humans do not break, they rise. Riker floated in silence inside the small escape pod, his eyes fixed on the stars. As the wreck of the Dravari ship drifted in the distance, fire and smoke bleeding into the black sky, the silence was not empty. It was heavy, full of meaning, full of memory, full of the screams of a ship that had learned the cost of touching fire. Hours passed, but he did not sleep. Soldiers do not sleep when the mission is not over. Then he saw them, Earth ships. They arrived like a swarm, their designs sharp and deadly, their engines glowing bright with the fury of a race that had been challenged. These were not scouts or diplomats. These were warships forged for battle, born from centuries of survival and conflict. Each vessel carried weapons that could crack asteroids. Each was piloted by warriors trained for the worst, and they were angry. They moved around the escape pod gently, as if protecting something sacred. A message came through his pod screen, a clear signal in Earth. Standard, stand by for retrieval. Commander, you are not alone. Riker leaned back as the pod shifted, pulled into one of the larger ships. The inside was bright, clean, full of human air and human voices. He stepped out and was greeted by two soldiers who stood at attention, faces filled with respect, not because of rank, but because of what he had done. Welcome back, sir, one of them said. He gave a short nod and walked with them down the hallway, every step echoing with purpose. Inside the briefing room, high command officers waited along with intelligence leaders and fleet commanders. They asked for details. Riker gave them everything: locations, ship layout, Dravari tactics, their experiments, their mistakes, and most important of all, their fear. They listened in silence, and when he finished, they did not speak right away. They looked at each other as if trying to decide what to do with this new fire placed in their hands. Riker already knew the answer. This was not about rescue. This was not about defense anymore. This was war. The leaders agreed within minutes. The Dravari had crossed a line they could never uncross. They had taken a soldier. They had tried to break him. They had studied humanity like insects, but they had forgotten one truth: humans adapt, and humans hit back. Within 2 hours, the fleet changed course, not to return home, but to move forward. They would find the nearest Dravari outpost and make contact, not with words, but with warning on board. The command ship Riker stood at the main window, watching the stars ahead. He wore a new uniform, one with no rank badge, only a symbol on his chest, the mark of Earth's Special Response Division, created just for him. Division built to strike first, to remind the galaxy of Earth's strength. He was no longer just a survivor. He was the beginning of something new. The fleet reached the edge of Dravari territory faster than expected. The first outpost appeared on sensors, a large station orbiting a red planet full of ships and defenses. They sent no greeting when the Earth fleet arrived. They did not need to. They had already received the signal from the destroyed ship. They knew who had done it. Still, Earth sent a message, only one sentence broadcasted in every known language: return our people or face what he faced. There was no reply, so Earth opened fire. The sky lit up as beams of plasma and Kinetic rounds tore through the station, shields flared, then shattered ships tried to escape, but were caught in traps, netted by EMP wave and precision strikes. In less than 15 minutes, the entire outpost was disabled, not destroyed, but silenced. Riker stood on the deck watching the enemy's command ship flicker, then fade from power. He gave no speech. He offered no threat. He simply watched as the crew prepared for the next jump. This was just the beginning. Other species across the stars watched. From a distance, some were allies, some were enemies, some were undecided. But all of them now had a new name to whisper in: Fear Earth, not because of its weapons, not because of its fleet, but because of the human they had captured and failed to break. The one who turned a prison into a battlefield. The one who walked through fire and made it follow him. The one who showed the stars that humans were not weak, not soft, not prey. They were something else entirely. And now the galaxy would learn that the hard way. The Dravari Empire was not small. It stretched across 9 sectors, ruled by councils and warlords connected by trade and fear. They had grown bold with time, believing themselves untouchable beyond consequence, but the fire that Riker lit on that single ship had become something far greater. Word spread like storm winds across the systems. A single human had turned a vessel of war into a graveyard. A lone soldier had broken their technology, outsmarted their elite, burned their pride to ash. No invasion force, no army, no fleet, just one man. And now Earth was moving. Fleet after fleet began to enter Dravari space, not to conquer, but to send a message. You will not touch us and walk away. You will not take our people and return to silence. You will not chain a human and expect peace. Riker stood once more on the bridge of Earth's lead ship, now called the Revenant. He had no rank, no medals, only a name that echoed through coms like a myth. The Dravari called him the Flame Walker, the burned hand, the one who hunts from inside. But humans simply called him Riker. He watched as another Dravari ship powered down at the edge of a system, surrendering without a fight. Its crew sent out beacons of surrender, begging not to be boarded, not to be judged by the man who walked among shadows. Earth did not need to fire anymore. Fear had already landed, but Riker was not satisfied with fear. Fear fades. He wanted something else. He wanted understanding. He requested a meeting with the Dravari High Council, not to demand tribute, not to claim power, but to make them look him in the eyes and understand what they had awakened. When he entered the council chamber, the room fell into silence. 10 Dravari leaders sat frozen as he walked forward. Without armor, without weapons, just the fire of memory behind his eyes. You wanted to test a species, he said. You wanted to understand what makes humans different. Now you know we do not surrender, we do not forget, we do not break, we endure. And then he turned his back on them, not waiting for permission, not needing their words. He had already won. He returned to Earth, not to rest, but to train the next wave of soldiers. Soldiers who would learn what he had learned, not just about war, but about patience, about purpose, about the quiet strength that comes when no one believes in you. Galaxy changed that year. Alliances shifted. Enemies grew careful. Neutral powers began to listen closer to Earth's words. Trade routes opened. Respect replaced suspicion. But above all, one lesson was learned. Never capture a human thinking you have the upper hand. Because humans do not rise to meet expectations. They rise to burn them down. And deep in the vaults of Dravari history, on scorched data drives and sealed chambers, one name was marked, not with hate, but with warning: Riker Hayes, the man who turned fear into fire and walked away with the stars watching. And subscribe my channel for more HFY stories like this one.